Okay, good evening. Can you hear me? Okay? Okay, great. Thank you very much for coming to Environments of Disquiet, hosted by the DePaul Humanities Center. My name is Yuki Miyamoto. I'm the director of the DePaul Humanities Center, and my other two hats, I have three hats. My other two hats are the professor in Religious Studies Department, teaching ethics, and the co-director of the Japanese Studies program. Tonight, I'd like to welcome you all to this special occasion. Environment of Disquiet includes a series of events taking place on and off campus. Tonight, we are having a guest speaker from Kyoto, Japan, the environmental activist Aileen Smith, whom I will introduce more properly in a minute. Meanwhile, I'd like to invite you to the photo exhibition at the Richardson Art Gallery, where you can see 26 photos of Minamata that Eugene Smith and Aileen produced together. Although there was the same series of photo exhibition in a convention center in Hawaii in 2022, I like to boast about DePaul's exhibition being the first in the gallery exhibition in the United States in the 21st century. I hope that this is the first of many in the US and beyond. We are also hosting a film screening tomorrow at 6 o'clock at SAC 154. We will have two interlocutors after the film, along with Aileen. One is Miss Sarah Chambers, who is the director of the Japanese Cultural Center, the executive director of the Japanese Arts Foundation, and she's also an alumna of DePaul. I'm excited to have the student representative for this film screening, Emerson Tinkler, who is the second year and the Japanese Studies major and sitting there. Yay, okay, good. Please bring your friends too, and pizza will be served. So first, the DePaul Humanities Center is pleased to have Dr. Mark Parsnak with us, who is the representative for the Presidential Sustainability Committee, to give us an overview of DePaul's work for sustainability and environmental justice. After Dr. Parsnak's opening remark, followed by Eileen's talk, we will have Dr. Robin Hecker on the stage to have a conversation with Aileen. We will have the Q&A session before concluding tonight's event. So now let me introduce Dr. Mark Parsnak. Dr. Parsnak has degrees from Harvard and Columbia and was a fellow in the Advanced Study Program at the National Center for Atmospheric Research. His research focuses on how climate change impacts interactions between the plants and the air quality. His studies have revealed complex connections between temperature, drought, invasive species, carbon dioxide concentration, and other global climate change factors on ecosystem emissions of biogenic volatile organic compounds. I wish I knew what I'm talking about. He also deploys low-cost air quality sensors that provide information for urban areas to be more resilient to climate change. Through the Metropolitan Chicago Data Science Corps, he fosters the work of student researchers who partner with local nonprofit organizations to meet their data science needs. Dr. Parsnak has been trained as a climate ambassador for the Catholic Climate Covenant, and in this role, he shares his scientific understanding with others from a faith perspective. So let us welcome Dr. Mark Parsnak.
Thank you so much. Just give me a second here. Great. Welcome, and thanks for the invitation to talk for a couple minutes tonight, talk a little bit about sustainability at DePaul, and also one local environmental issue that I think will provide good context for the larger discussion we're having tonight. But I do want to just step back. That was a very kind introduction, and I really appreciate it, but you probably got a little bored at the biogenic volatile organic compound part. Luckily, I'm not talking about those tonight. Those are a little complex. But I'm much more proud of some of the stuff towards the end of that introduction where I'm working with people to think about climate change. I'd like to give a big shout out to my colleagues at DePaul, particularly in the liberal arts, where I've learned so much. When I came to DePaul, I thought about climate change and environmental issues purely as scientific problems. Just sit there and figure out what needs to be done. Just try, that's Vincentian. But look at the science, try and figure out what the pollution sources are, and just tackle it. Maybe if you have to, use a little economics. That was my training. Now, when I got here, I realized to have effective action about environmental justice, about climate change, locally, nationally, globally, you really, you have to bring in multiple perspectives from the liberal arts. Obviously ethics, but it goes on and on from there. History, journalism, communication, and these are all really important perspectives to have. So I'm very appreciative. I feel like I'm, maybe not much of a better scientist, but I'm a much better science communicator, and I think, and I think collectively I've learned so much. So big shout out, and I really appreciate this opportunity. So we have been working on sustainability for quite some time at DePaul, about 14 years by my count. I wasn't the driver, but I was a participant in most of these blocks up here. I really want to acknowledge the work of my still colleague, Dr. James Montgomery, Jim Montgomery. He started all this back 14 years ago with another colleague, Scott Kelly, who's no longer at the university. But the two of them led an effort called the Sustainability Initiatives Task Force. And that, over a couple years, that would morph into the DePaul Sustainability Network. And they put together a really nice plan, what sustainability could mean at DePaul. Unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, the plan, little pieces happened. There was a lot of bottom-up activity, but there wasn't a lot of institutional support at the time. But things keep going and kept going. And another colleague I'd like to particularly mention is Dr. Barbara Willard in communications. She was part of the Vincentian Mission Institute. And if you don't know what the Vincentian Mission Institute is, I was a later member of it. It is a great opportunity for DePaul faculty and staff to collaborate with colleagues at St. John's University and Niagara University, the two other Vincentian universities here in the United States, and work together and think about mission. And Barb Willard, when she thought about mission, she thought about the relationship between DePaul and also Pope Francis's encyclical on the environment called Laudato Si. So they made really nice connections there. Again, this was a more theoretical framework. There was a little bit of activity around it and still a lot of ground up work on sustainability at DePaul. So then fast forward into just a little bit past, and we have the Presidential Sustainability Committee. This was actually founded by our former president, but it continues today with President Rob, so we're very excited. We've put together some documents, but I think we've become much more action-oriented. I think we realized that, yes, we might get some support, and I'll show you some of the support we're getting. There's an effort called Just DePaul, and I know that the DePaul Humanities Center and Just DePaul have had some links, and I think hopefully there'll be some more. But sustainability at DePaul now lives under Just DePaul. Just DePaul considers social and environmental justice from a mission framework. You can see Ruben there, and also we have a Rihanna, who's a graduate student and is our sustainability coordinator this year, which is excellent. They're doing a lot of good work. I'd encourage you to come to the spooky sustainability celebration. I know I'm going to come with environmental science and studies, and I told some students, like, yeah, we got a table and we do this at different events. And like, okay, Dr. P, but you have to wear a costume. I'm like, oh no. So we'll have to navigate that. I'd also point that we have a new website. Right now, honestly, this is a blog that got built out into a website. But but we do have at least a web presence here now at DePaul. So there's a lot happening. So that's exciting. So I'm going to talk about this fairly quickly. I'd like to switch gears now and talk about one local environmental issue. Does anybody recognize this site? There's the street name would probably help. I can't, okay, it's an industrial site. If you were to walk by it today, all you would see is open ground. It's very close to General Iron. Yeah, it's the precursor to, well, not the precursor, it was its original neighbor, Finkel Steel. It's the Finkel Steel plant. Right now it's nothing, and it's slated for development. It's where Lincoln Yards is slated to be, although apparently that's in a little bit of a kerfuffle. So here's a little bit blown out. If you ever, probably the most common reason you'd see this if you ever walk to the metro station. You'd walk right by the old Finkel Steel site. I remember walking by Finkel Steel when it was still active. They had blast furnaces, so you'd walk by on the street and you could look off and see this glowing molten iron right off the street. It was pretty incredible. And again, it's all torn down there. There's nothing there anymore. So Finkel has a very long history, founded back in the 1800s. You can see it was in this Lincoln Park location for more than 100 years. It had a lot of political significance. Our former governor, Blagovich, had a connection somehow to Finkel Steel. Maybe his dad worked there or something like that. I don't remember the full connection. But he would hold political events there. And this was held up as like a really highlight of industry persisting in Chicago. It was thought of as really a gem of the area. Now, unfortunately, Finkel Steel, the problem was it emitted pollution. And the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency knew how much pollution. It wasn't a ton, but it was considered one of the highest impact factories in the United States. Not because of its total amount of pollution, but because it was in such a dense area, and it was in Lincoln Park. So they were told to move, and they did. They moved down to the south side. Seemed like a great idea. Move from Lincoln Park, a very populous neighborhood, move down to the south side of Chicago. They really wanted to keep the factory in Chicago. They wanted that factory to stay in the city of Chicago. So they moved it down there. And yeah, it's a less dense neighborhood, but I'm sure you all know where this story is going. It moved from a largely white Lincoln Park affluent neighborhood to a brown and black neighborhood on the south side. Yes, there were less residents, but there were still many residents, and they were then the victims of industrial pollution. So this got talked about quite a lot about 15 years ago. You can read some of the quotes here. Again, it's not that the factory was that bad of a polluter overall. It was just in such a populous neighborhood. Even at this time, Finkel had a lot of political capital. So there's a big article in the Chicago Tribune about it. And even the name Finkel Steel doesn't occur till I was still reading physical newspapers, and it's in the, you had to flip the page to see the name of Finkel there. So they planned to move and close the mill, 84% white, and move to another site on where it was 96% black. So, I mean, a stark example of environmental injustice, just as clear as it could be. So we're all talking about this, and we mentioned General Iron. So the same thing happens exactly again over the last couple years. Right next to Finkel Steel is a metals recycler. Now, we'd like to recycle metals, but there's pollution associated with that again. And you have this metal recycler, again, located in Lincoln Park, and again told to move, and gets a bunch of money to move down to the south side. The very late in the process, a bunch of people start screaming the environmental injustice of this. And the mayor, Lightfoot, gets involved, holds it up. It doesn't, I think it's actually operating. That's my understanding. The mayor tried to hold it up. The judge overturned it because essentially all the paperwork was signed by the time the mayor was trying to hold it up. And then now Johnson's pledged to fight it, but I couldn't find anything in the news since this article over the summer where they were given the green light by the judge. So, as we talk about environmental pollution, obviously at a different scale and with even more tragic results, it's still happening here in Chicago. And the whole General Iron story happened, you know, the same story happened twice right here in our neighborhood of Lincoln Park. So we really do have to keep conscious of these things. And again, I could go through and talk about exposure studies and what pollutants were emitted and health impacts. But I think what we're learning here now is those stories aren't effective. We really have to talk about the people impacted. And that's why I think this, the talk tonight and this whole topic is so powerful. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Great to learn about DePaul's attempts and the faculty members and students who are working on these important issues. Thank you so much. And I'm so grateful that Miss Aileen Mioko Smith came all the way from Kyoto, Japan to visit DePaul. Thank you, Aileen. And let me introduce you to her. Aileen Smith was born in Tokyo, Japan in 1950. She graduated from high school in St. Louis County, Missouri. She enrolled in Stanford in 1968, dropping out after meeting the photojournalist W. Eugene Smith in New York. Together, they photographed Japan's mercury pollution disaster in Minamata, Japan, publishing their book, Minamata, 1975. And this book is available at the photo exhibition at the Richardson Gallery. Aileen has a master's degree in environmental science from Columbia University's School of Public Health. She became active in the anti-nuclear movement in Japan during the early 1980s after interviewing citizens around the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania. Aileen is currently the executive director of the NGO Green Action based in Kyoto, Japan. As the president of Aileen Archive, she is committed to disseminating the photographic work by Eugene and Aileen on Minamata. She is also a recipient of the Nuclear Free Future Award in 2014. Without further ado, let us welcome Ms. Aileen Mioko Smith.
Thank you very much. The mic is on, right? You can hear me. Okay. So tonight, I've decided to kind of subtitle my talk, and it's Environments of Disquiet, but Environmental Justice, Activism, and Photojournalism, Lessons from Minamata for Today's Challenges. I'm really happy to be here. It's wonderful to be here. As Professor Miyamoto mentioned, I spent my junior high and high school years in the Midwest in St. Louis County. And anyway, and I remember visiting Chicago as a 12-year-old or whatever, you know, those years. So anyway, it's wonderful to be here, and your students are wonderful. And I'm glad that there are many present here today, right now. I had 2 classes, and they were great. They were very memorable. So tonight, I'll be speaking a lot about Minamata, but what I would like to say is, yes, I was born in post-war Japan in 1950, and grew up there until I was 11, until I went to St. Louis. But the Minamata that I'll be speaking about is from the perspective of a 21 to a 24-year-old. Because I first heard about Minamata when I was 20 in New York, and Gene and I went to Minamata, and we photographed for 3 years. So everything the way I saw the situation and the way I was photographing and everything is from the kind of the soul and the experience of a 21 to a 24-year-old. So in that sense, maybe it resonates, more with the students. Just a little bit of background, and that is that Minamata, the problem of Minamata is very much an ongoing issue. There are still 9 lawsuits underway right now as we speak, and one of the verdicts happened just 3 weeks ago. where victims who are now living in central Japan, yeah, okay. So victims that were living, that are now living in central Japan in the Osaka, Kyoto, Kansai area, there were over 100 that sued, and every single one was recognized by the court as having Minamata disease. This was a lawsuit against the that they had sued the Japanese government, and the government had not recognized them, and the court recognized them. But just a couple of weeks ago, the government decided to appeal the case, so it's now going to appellate court. So the fight is ongoing. And right now, as we speak, there are a total of 3,000 officially designated victims of Minamata disease, designated by the government. But over these years, over 30,000 people have applied for certification to be officially recognized as victims. So only 1/10 have been recognized. And this disaster happened, first the discovery was in 1956, so it's now 67 years since the discovery of Minamata disease. But even to date, this environmental poisoning situation, there's never been an epidemiological study undertaken by the authorities. And we're still fighting to try to get an epidemiological study undertaken. So it's really maybe shocking and surprising, but it's very much an ongoing issue. So I'm going to first talk about how I and Jean heard about Minamata, and then when I start showing you photographs of Minamata, I'll explain a little bit more about what took place and the context. I feel that it was a kind of a phenomenon that happened in that I was a sophomore at Stanford, and it was during the Vietnam War, and I was sort of seeking, what to really do, what is it that one can accomplish. And for me, what was really important is that I had lived in Japan, and then I had lived in the US, and there were such different cultures. And the 8 years that I lived in St. Louis, I only met 2 other Japanese people, and nobody had ever met an Oriental person. I was sort of a representative of the Orient. I was asked about Asia, China and Korea and all the time. And yet in Japan, it was, and yet in Japan, I was very much like an American. And the 2 worlds were so separate, and I was really interested in how different cultures can communicate with each other and can have a greater understanding of each other. And I was very interested in connecting cultures, and that was the feeling I had. And also I felt very much, the injustice in the world, but I didn't know concretely what to do about it. So anyway, in a summer job, I went to New York, and it was for a Japanese advertising company called Dentsu, and the client was Fujifilm. And we were to photograph 2 photographers who would say, Fuji color is beautiful. So after we photographed the first photographer, filmed him, we were assigned to go and see this photographer named Eugene Smith. And so we went to the loft in New York, and it was on 8 East 28th Street in New York, in Manhattan. And I still remember when we went to the entrance, the Dentsu people and the Fujifilm people were certain that we had the wrong place. It was like a, black sprayed colored paint on the glass wall to try to, make it more opaque. And there was a hardware store downstairs and a handmade mailbox. And they said, oh my gosh, we're in the wrong place. And I just instinctively knew this person, this is the right place. We got to knock on the door. And we knocked on the door, and Gene came down. And because he was a really well-known photographer, the people were, really saying how wonderful it was to meet him, and it was such an honor and everything like that. But he's just very humorous, and he just turned to me and said, "Did you ever hear of me?" And I said, "No, I never heard of you before." So it was a feeling of immediately kind of connecting with each other. At that time, Gene had been a photographer for many years. He started photographing when he was 14, and it was in the Midwest in Wichita. And so he experienced the Depression and the dust storms there. And he used to go out and photograph that situation. He felt like his station in life was to record life and people as it was, you know. And he went to New York, and when he was 18, he wrote back to his mother, and he did say, "My station in life is to portray, you know, the life as it is, and that is what I'm committed to do my whole life, and that there will be many, many painful and difficult days, but if I can pursue that and continue doing that and actually implement it, then you know, I have fulfilled my you know, this strong mission that I have." You know, these weren't his exact words, but essentially he was saying that he's very committed. And so the man I met when he was 51 was somebody that had actually done that. He photographed World War II, 13 invasions of World War II, and was injured in Okinawa at age 26. And then after that, he worked for Life magazine, and he did many photo essays. And then after that, he spent a whole year in Pittsburgh photographing the ironworks and the life in Pittsburgh. And then you know, he was just very depressed. His war injuries had worn him down, and there was so much pain with the war injuries that he drank scotch, you know, around the clock. And but he wanted to compile all that work that he had done. So I walked into a loft where he was trying to assemble his whole retrospective, his whole life, in a 600 print photographic exhibition. And right away, I realized that it wasn't going to happen unless somebody really, you know, everybody kind of got together and really put it together. And that's how I ended up dropping out and doing that. But the reason I talk about this is that it's like somebody that doesn't know anything about photography. I didn't even know that a 600 print show was a large show. I didn't know. But I became involved in doing it, and then and the exhibition made it on time. But during that time, Gene talked about his commitment to journalism. And I want to talk a little bit about that because I think it's applicable for other things in life, especially academia and other things in life. And that is that he said, with journalism, he said, we're not objective. Objective, to say, I'm going to do this objectively, we're really lying to ourselves and other people, because we are subjective. From the way we grew up and the way we believe and everything, we're subjective. And what we have to do is be as honest and fair as possible. And that's what journalism is about. And to be just as honest and fair as possible. And also, he believed that his responsibility as a journalist was to his subjects and to the viewers. And those were the two responsibilities he had. In other words, the people he photographed and the people that he delivered the photographs to, meaning, well, the viewer. And he worked for Life magazine, so he had editors, you know, he had a boss and everything that, but he knew that his two responsibilities were for those two, the subject and the viewer. And I feel that this is really kind of actually helpful for other walks of life too, because I think that in daily life, we're surrounded by other people that work with us, or superiors, or the institution, or whatever. And it's so easy to start thinking about, you know, how to please that situation, or well, basically you have to work with this situation and, you know, how to get around it and all that. And we get so involved with that we lose sight of, you know, the commitment we have and the delivery, and that all you have to do is worry about those two and meeting those two responsibilities. And Gene used to take pride in the fact that every story for Life magazine, he fought with the editors, not because he wanted his way, but, it's not my phone, right? No, not because he wanted his way, but because he knew he had to fight for those two entities, you know, the subject and the viewer. And he took pride in the fact that finally the result was good. Finally, it did resonate, and it actually sold magazines, so that finally you do deliver to the people that are right around you, you know, your boss and whatever. So, and his commitment to that kind of thing was so strong, and anyway, it was so strong, and I just felt so committed, you know, about the way he saw journalism and the way he approached photography. And right at that time, about 6 weeks after I met him and we were in the throes of the exhibition, is when a gentleman named Motomura Kazuhiko came to visit Gene, and he wanted to bring the exhibition to Japan after it was shown in New York. And he said, I know this place called Minamata, and he told us about what it was, that it was a tragic environmental pollution situation. A chemical company named Chiso in southern Japan, in Kumamoto Prefecture, had poisoned the environment with mercury. This was a factory that made ingredients for plastics, and in making this acetaldehyde, used mercury as a catalyst. And although a catalyst you're supposed to recycle, they were trying to make a lot of money quickly and take that money to Tokyo. And so they kept dumping all this poisons into the bay. And it had contaminated the microorganisms, and then through the food chain went into the fish. And also, so the fish were poisoned, many killed, cats, birds, dogs, pigs, and the people that were surrounded there who ate the fish. At that point in 1956, it was very, very, the very, very acute poisoning was visible, and that meant, you know, people who consumed the fish, you know, one day you could start having ataxia, not being able to walk, went blind, had convulsions, and many died very quickly. And then there were others who were bedridden for a long time. So we heard about that, and we immediately felt we wanted to go, and that's why we immediately, you know, wanted to go, and we went it took us a while to get there, but that's how we got to Minamata. I want to start showing the photographs, but let's see. But just to show you, this is the Minamata movie. It's based on the book that we did, and Gene is played by Johnny Depp, and to the left is an actress named Minami who played me. She's much older than I was when I was there in Minamata. And I made about 200 cassette tapes while we were there. And I've recently heard my voice, and I was really surprised because I'm like, I'm talking like this, and do you want to hear? Like that. So it was very different, but yeah. But the experience of the movie and dealing with Hollywood was very challenging and very, very, very difficult because I didn't have control over the movie, but I felt so committed to the fact that the victims would be portrayed properly, and also Gene would be, and Gene's and my relationship would be too. You know, these were all important things to me, and when you can't really control something and you have to kind of battle Hollywood by yourself, it was very, very painful. But the experience that I learned from this is that if you let go and allow many, many more people to be involved with something, then it can spread to a much, much wider world. The movie was filmed in Serbia and Montenegro, so many of the people, the Serbian staff were, people who had experienced, as very young people or children had experienced the war or after effects of the war. And so, there are just hundreds of people involved when you make a movie, not just the director and the actors, but, all the people that are on the set and makeup artists, et cetera. And so everybody had this sort of their own commitment, towards Minamata. even though they'd never been there. And I think the net result is it goes out to a much wider world, a huge world out there that doesn't know about what happened to these victims. And I hope that, by seeing the movie, then many people want to know, what really happened and what's going on, and learn, kind of the lessons that Minamata have to teach us. So this is Jean and I, and I just want to talk a little bit about how we photographed. I know I'm talking a lot about that, but I wanted to talk about learning and teaching, because this is a teaching institute here. It was a unique way of learning and teaching. Here's a veteran photographer and somebody who's doing this photography project for the first time. And we work seamlessly together. And I never for one moment felt that I was being taught by Jean. I never felt like I'm a student learning. And yet, my knowledge of photography was absolutely zero when I met him. So I know that everything I know about photography is through him. So, how did that happen? And I think that Jean had a unique quality of, even not just with me, but with other people, when we were working in the exhibition in New York, is somebody would walk in, a friend of a friend. He didn't even know if that person had gone into art school or anything. He's just saying, here we are, we're spotting prints here, here's a spot tone, here's the brush, thanks for coming, and we'll walk away. And I think that this made everybody like, whoa, wait a second, this is an original print, and I've been asked to spot it, and it's 5 minutes since I walked in here. You grow. I mean, you do it. You feel you have to do it right. And so it's just it's a natural way of learn. That's one way of, I think, teaching and learning, and it was a very unique way. And also the order of learning is completely upside down in my experience. I was making the first large print I ever made was one of the exhibition prints, the first ever one I made. And then much later, we did contact sheets or proof prints. It just, the order didn't matter. It was what had to be done right then. So I think that it is a kind of unique way of, an interesting way of learning and teaching. This is our house, and to the right, beyond our car there, is where Kawamoto Teruo lived. He was one of the leaders of the patients groups. He's portrayed in the movie as Mitsuo, and he lived down the street from us, or I should say that we went and we moved into an area where he was down the street. This is our landlady and our futon there in our house. That's this was the same room, one room we had, and it's messy, and every time I see it, I think I gotta clean it up. It's the same room, and this is an altar in the back. It's Toyoko, our landlord, suffered from, it was a family that had been hit by Minamata disease. Their daughter fell ill when she was 5, and she died when she was 8. And she would have been a little bit older than I if she had lived. And my bed, my futon, where my pillow was, is exactly where Jean's sitting. So for 3 years, right close to me was Toyoko. And I lived with Toyoko for 3 years. And I knew from her sisters and her mother, how much she had suffered and died. And I've never met her, but I feel like I'm, with her, kind of. And this is our dark room with the, not dark room, it's our kitchen, actually. It's a mud floor. Yeah, right, you wonder. Yeah, right, it's pretty hard to block off this light here. No, it's, but we developed our film here. And the photograph of Tomoko in the bath, which maybe Robin and I will talk about later, it was developed here, and it was dried on that clothespin there. And then later on, we had a dark room. which cost 2,000 yen, which was really high for me. Trying to figure out how to pay 2,000 yen, which is about, what, $15 a month. It was really difficult. This is Jean, and with one of the children there, who is a nephew of a patient that I will show a photograph of in a minute. These photographs were taken by a guy named Takeshi Ishikawa, who was our assistant for quite a while in Minamata. And this is Tomoko's family welcoming us, the father and the mother, and one of the children. And she was the oldest of 7 siblings. And her mother used to say that, or father and mother both used to say that she was a takarago. Takarago means a treasure child. This was the first child, the firstborn. And of course, the mother wanted to have a healthy child, and so made sure that she ate a lot of protein, fish, and unknowingly, the fish tastes fantastic, even though it's really seriously polluted with mercury. It's fresh, but she did not know that there was poison in there, and that went through the barrier, the placental barrier, and went into Tomoko. And the reason she says that Tomoko is a treasure child is that she feels Tomoko absorbed all the mercury that was in her body, and so when she had her next child, her placenta, her body was much safer, and that Tomoko had shouldered the mercury, the whole mercury for the family. So this is Tomoko in the middle there, and all the other kids. And Jean's in there too, with an editor that came from Tokyo. And to the right are some activists and a playwright and his wife. And I just want to show you this photograph because it's a wonderful family photograph. My grandson just adores the boy that's lying down and sleeping. His son is one of the favorite older boys. They're looking up to a high school student, and my grandson's 10 years old, but anyway, so we still go to the house there, and the parents are raising the grandchild, actually. But the reason I show this photograph is this is after they gave us dinner. They had us all over, and we had dinner, and it just shows that that the victims, because they had risen up and they sat in front of the Chiso factory in 1956, and the whole world ignored them. The whole town was dependent upon Chiso, the factory, and nobody supported them. And they were forced to sign a solatium contract, which sort of was like, we feel sorry for you, so we're going to give you some money. That was the contract that they signed with the company, with an agreement that they would never sue again, even though the company was found to be, the cause of Minamata disease. All along, the company knew, because they had been doing cat experiments with the wastewater, feeding the cats, and the Minamata disease had been created in the cats. But they hid that and got the patients to sign agreement. And so this was the second round, and they knew that they had to have the support of the whole, just everybody. Also, Tomoko's mother much later said that, referring to the bath picture where Jean took a photograph of her bathing her child, that unless you see it, you cannot understand the suffering. You cannot understand the hardship, she said. And so they knew that it had to be visible. And to make it visible, they had to take in and accept a wide range of people. And in 21, 22, I felt that, but I think I felt it even more now, that to accept people of different cultures and different backgrounds, different political backgrounds, and very different many different views. And just, you're living in the country, and these people in Tokyo are intellectuals or activists or whatever, and photographers and documentary filmmakers and everybody. But they were assertively saying yes. And I feel that that it was like now realizing, you know, how difficult that must have been, but they knew that that was absolutely necessary. So now I'm going to show you the photographs. About 40% are taken by me and the rest by Jean, maybe a little bit more there by Jean. Anyway, I'm going to showing them. Jean would be really upset at the light on the right corner, so please imagine that it's black. So I want to stop here for a little bit. This is the Chiso factory on the right and Minamata Bay on the left. And so it's sort of surrounded with that island, Koijishima, in the middle. So the pollution went into the bay there and contaminated that entire bay and all the people around it. Later, the company secretly diverted the water further north, which is to the right, off the right of the photograph. And as a result, they thought that it would dilute it, and then it looks like there's no problem anymore. But as a result, it went to that much larger sea outside and polluted a much, much wider area. And so I feel that one of the things that I've written about, like the 10 kind of methods that the government and corporations use when in cases like this, in pollution or in any kind of disaster. And one of the key methods is to confuse or to make it complicated. And what happened is that it was like, what could be causing this poisoning? You know, the fish, if you ate the fish in Minamata Bay, you were poisoned. So what would be causing the poison? And there was they got a Tokyo University professor to say it must be amin, which, it's like, it's rotten fish, and it's ridiculous that fisher folk will be eating rotten fish, but like that was one theory that was put out. Another was maybe there was a bomb that had been dropped in Minamata Bay, maybe it leaked and was emitting poison. There was no proof that a bomb had ever dropped into Minamata Bay, and then, and also, but it could be the factory, and et cetera, et cetera. And then afterwards, it's like, it looks like the factory, but we don't know the mechanism. We don't know from where it comes and how does it get into the fish and everything. And that dialogue was raised up to a real high level, when actually that's fine to find out the mechanism and what happens finally. Scientifically, it's fine, but the most important thing is that whatever it is, you eat the fish, it's a heavy metal, you eat the fish and you get sick, And so the fishing had to be banned, but fishing was never banned in Minamata Bay. So that was a technique where it's like, this is very complicated, we're trying to figure out what the pollutant is, et cetera, et cetera. And the other thing that was used is that there's usually some kind of law in place that you could use, but you don't use that law. You don't use the law. And so there was a food sanitation law, where if a restaurant has, serving poison, you shut it down right away, and then you try to track down who ate it. Well, the reason they did not employ the food sanitation law is there was a discussion, and they said, it's not proven that every single fish in Minamata Bay is poisonous. And that was the reason not to implement the food sanitation law. So, the fisher folk did a self-imposed ban, which is really like cutting off your source of income, as well as your family getting sick. And then when told, no, it's safe again, of course you start fishing again, and then the thing got repeated, and the pollution spread even more. The other thing that I think this portrays is that at this time, Chiso was very busy in trying to make as much money as possible to take to Tokyo. There was a factory they wanted to build near Tokyo. That's actually the factory where Jean got beaten up. It was in Goi in Chiba. but they were very busy. So it was like a skyste, which means like, a disposable town here. You make the money here, you take it out, and the pollution stays here and remains here. So it's sort of a division of profit and the pollution. And so that's what happened. So, but basically, I'm talking about this one situation, Minamata, but I really feel that pollution, like this case, or any pollution case, environmental pollution, it's actually, of course, it could be parts per million or, various elements, whatever the poison is or the pollution is or the problem is. But basically, it's the concrete sort of manifestation of relationships between people. What is the relationships people have between each other? It's like a concrete manifestation. So it's a concrete manifestation of discrimination. It's a concrete manifestation of how we relate to each other and also how we relate to nature. So it's like, it's a paradigm shift that's needed. It's a completely, it has to be at that level that change happens. Because if it's not one pollutant, then it's going to be another. So it's all about how we relate to each other and how we relate to nature. So I think that just this, this photograph or the situation in Minamata really, tells that story, I think. This is a photograph taken north of Minamata. As explained, the company had secretly diverted the water, kind of trying to get away from the situation, trying to escape it, and figured that if it's diluted, much wider area, then the problem will go away. And therefore, then many more people got sick. And Takako here, a congenital Minamata victim, she's poisoned in her mother's womb, was poisoned because of that. And she knew it all her life, that it wouldn't have happened if Chiso had not tried to avoid avoid the problem. Takako died very suddenly a few months ago, and it was just so sudden, but she was receiving round-the-clock care, and her whole life was spent bedridden, but she loved Disneyland, and she got to Disneyland several times. And she was very lively person. And I remember watching fireworks with her a couple years ago. And it was like, I really learned how to watch fireworks. It was incredible. Because every time one went off, she had a voice or a delight or a whatever, and each one was a different quality. It was like this and small one or whatever. And it's like, wow, I learned how to watch fireworks through her, actually. This is another person that lived very near Takako and her family. And he had been bedridden for years and years and years, and he had just been officially designated just a couple weeks before we photographed him, and he passed away very soon after. But he'd been bedridden for 10 years. And the reason he had been certified is that Kawamoto Teruo, the man I talked to you about that, we lived near his house, he's portrayed as Mitsuo in the movie, character Mitsuo in the movie. He went door to door on this bicycle. He rode the bicycle every night after work, sometimes an hour, sometimes 2 hours, going from door to door in a wider and wider area, even up to Tsunagi here, and found that there were many, many people that were bedridden, many, many people were ill. So he realized that this had spread a lot, that it really was still happening and not recognized in the area. And he asked the doctor from Kumamoto to come down, Dr. Harada Masazumi from Kumamoto. And I think that it was so important, this connection, in that Harada did not say, wow, he's not educated, I'm a doctor, he's sort of a layperson, and I don't have anything to learn from him. He did go, and he did go around, and he did learn more, and he did really recognize that it had spread. So that recognition of how it had spread is because the the expert and the person that on site connected, because this person reached out and this person answered back. And then it really broke through. It's much more wider area had Minamata disease. And I really felt this when I was at 3 Mile Island, actually, is all the things that happened there. If academia and more people had gone and really asked the people, you would have learned, like the people would have learned so much more of what happened at 3 Mile Island. And that break is there. There's this cultural and kind of a different, two different worlds that didn't come together. This is Jitsuko. I showed you her nephew earlier with Jean. She's still currently getting 24-hour round-the-clock support. This is the president of Chiso at the time. This is the victims that were suing Chiso, so they rose up again and decided to fight. And this is because an outbreak had happened in Niigata, and those victims realized that they would not have fallen ill had the Minamata victims, had this issue been addressed earlier. And they went down and met the Minamata victims. So victims and victims met, and that really encouraged the Minamata people to stand up again and fight. And so when we went, they were in the middle of a lawsuit, actually attempting to sue, even though they had had that binding contract. So the victims that sued were a minority, and the ones that decided to ask the government to mediate were a majority. But here, the victims that were suing went to the government authorities and pushed them to make sure that they address those other victims properly. So the really important thing, one of the methods is to divide victims, right, and split them and have them pit against each other. And so it was really important to have techniques to, methods so that you can always be joining the victims, even though they had used, decided on different methods of pursuing justice. These are two mothers being made to wait at the Environment Agency. And they're still being made to wait at the Environment Agency because we've been going to the Environment Agency asking for this epidemiological study, and they keep saying, this is since 2009, they keep saying we're trying to attempt to do the study design. We're trying to figure out the study design. Literally, that's how long they've been saying that. So this is in the early 70s, and these two women, their daughters died really just really, really horrible, very, very difficult process, the hardship before dying. The woman that's on the left that's covering her face right now and resting, her daughter died of acute Minamata disease and was autopsied, and she had to carry the autopsied child on her back and walk the railroad back on the railroad tracks back to the house because it was at that time considered a contagious disease. So in the movie, it's depicted as when Gene and Eileen's character get off the train, there's a guy holding a child walking past, but this is about her. The director, my daughter and I invited the director to come to Minamata and see all the victims, and he met Nangai here, who really liked photography and went to our dark room and everything, and he decided to put that character into the movie. Hanaga Kazumitsu is still in the same facility. This was taken in 1972. This is Kawamoto holding the photograph to the right, and Sato, he is co-leader of the direct negotiations group. This is at the very last court session of the first lawsuit, where they were suing Chiso for legal responsibility for Minamata disease. And this is the verdict. It was in 1973 on March 20th. Chiso was found officially legally guilty of having caused Minamata disease. Was made to compensate a much, much larger amount than what they had done with the solatium. And this was a breakthrough, and so all the people that had mediated through the government now got compensation that was raised much higher up to the level that these victims got. And it also, these big lawsuits in Japan post-war, in the early 70s, really broke through and created much more, stringent application of environmental laws and made Japan, really much, much cleaner than it had been. And to me, I saw, at age 22, it was shown to me that at times justice can prevail, actually. And when victims stand up and all sorts of people come together in different ways, different abilities, different walks of life, and the courts function, that you can see that justice see the day of light. It can happen. And to me, that was this incredible gift that I received, and I could still feel it right here inside. I can actually feel it right inside here. It's like it's a fire. It's just burning. It's right here, and it doesn't go away no matter what. It just is there for me. It's there. It's just right here, and to me, that's the most sort of that's the most important kind of message I want to say is that. When we're older and we want to tell younger people, this is what should be done, or this is right, or this is wrong, it's like none of that. It's showing an example. It's showing that something can happen. It's just showing it, and once you see it, it's just a continuing source of energy, So it's about showing that something can happen. So I don't have time to really go through this, but it's the verdict, and it was really important because it talked about the fact that it's not just about following the rules. Even if you meet the government regulation, if you actually cause harm, you're liable. That's what this verdict says. Also, even if you say that you're better than other factories, that doesn't matter. If you've actually caused harm, you're liable. And that's what this verdict said. These are negotiations after the court verdict in order to get annual payments properly. So this is Toyoko. She was cremated. There was money to make a grave, proper grave for her. This is Shinobu. I'm also in touch with her a lot. She's a congenital Minamata victim, born in 1956. More photographs of Shinobu. This is Shinobu and her mother leaving Minamata Station for the first ever UN Environmental Conference in Stockholm. This was in 1972. And she said, until people visibly see what can, what pollution can cause, people can't understand. That's why I'm going to go. And this is Shinobu many decades later at one of the Minamata Convention, Mercury Convention meetings in Geneva. So many of the victims are aging right now. So these are the challenges right now that we're, talking about. And I think this is a direct translation. She called me back and she said, no, I want to say this instead if you're going to make that PowerPoint. The people who are fighting in the courts are just like me. They have eaten the same poisoned fish. So everyone is anxious about the future. Until things are happy for everyone, things aren't happy for me. So these are the last of the photographs, and I want to wrap up in 2 minutes or so. Is that, we're okay? I know I just wanted to show the photograph on the right was taken when I was 21. I took that photograph, and the photograph on the left was taken by somebody who's a Sophia University student in Tokyo, and it was taken when she's 21 years old. So there are two 21-year-old women taking these two photographs. The one on the right is the father, and the one on the left is the son. And the son is now head of the lawsuit for victims who are toddlers at the peak of the pollution, who are fighting to be recognized as Minamata disease. And so I addressed many of these issues, which the teachers have handed out to students about the methods that are used to try to, divide victims or not take data, and so that the best way is to not take the data, et cetera, and to create a state of isolation. And a lot of things that's happening now is that within the country, even very high levels of mercury, the victims aren't recognized, whereas Japan, internationally, with the Minamata Convention that's now going to be COP5 held at the end of this month, there are much, much lower levels of mercury causing problems to the fetus, et cetera, is recognized. So it's like a double standard where you try not to tell the people in Japan about what's going on outside, which is still happening. So this is the lawsuit that happened 3 weeks ago, the verdict, and everybody recognizing that. And this is 3 weeks ago when the head of the Minamata Convention came to Minamata and met with patients. She's the executive director of the convention. Oh, her name is Monica Stankiewicz. And I was told the pronunciation by one of the students today. She's Polish. So. Okay, that ends my presentation. And it's still very much of an ongoing issue. Mercury pollution is on the rise internationally. And one of the big causes of pollution, but one is the coal industry, and the other is the gold mining industry. Gold mining industry, where local people are mining the gold using mercury, and it's artisanal mining, and there are people that are really discriminated against, and it's their livelihood, but they're being poisoned really seriously, and it's still not really recognized and dealt. Well, it is recognized, but it's not being dealt with. And the other is coal. That burning coal emits mercury into the environment that goes into the ocean, and through the food chain enters the fish. And so Minamata disease, or the issue of mercury and climate issue, intersect there with coal. Also, they intersect with fluorescent light bulbs that have mercury in them. So that's really what I want to be working on, the intersection between those two things. And it also connects with nuclear power, and not having nuclear power, because nuclear power isn't the answer to the climate change. So, trying to deal with lots of different issues, but now much more talking to many students in Japan, and learning from them, and then coming here and learning from all the students here. So I'm going to end my talk right here very abruptly, but I think that thank you for listening to me, and I hope that Robin and I can have a good discussion. Okay, thank you very much. I go over there? Yeah. Oh, yeah, right, I didn't drink the water.
I'm actually from Pennsylvania, so I appreciate that you're working on 3 Mile Island and that issue, because I don't live that far away from
Really?
that.
Well, Middletown is another, I feel like, another Jimoto is where I grew up, except I was there when I was older, but.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you're still using your photographs for education. I have a couple students in the audience, and I took my students to visit the exhibit the other day. And one of my students noticed that the image of Tomoko in the bath, which is kind of the highlight of the movie, kind of builds up to the iconic image of Tomoko and her mother in the bath, is not in the exhibit. And I know that was a deliberate decision on your part, and was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that decision.
Yeah, 24 years ago, well, one is the photograph became so famous. It was really well known. And, that kind of creates a burden. And over the years, I really felt that everybody said, I want to have that photograph. That if I use that photograph, I've done my work in trying to fight against pollution, almost like, that it's that photograph. It was almost like it was being, like Tomoko was, I don't know, shouldering the responsibility of a lot of people to become more active in doing things, but rather, the photograph would kind of do the job, kind of, a little bit. And I was feeling that pressure building in me. And then the parents, in Minamata, it was the burden of always going out into the world that way, especially with the mother and the child in the bath. They said they wanted to have Tomoko rest, And I think a lot of it happened because of me really, it was difficult dealing with the weight of the photograph, but also I answered their call, and I decided to exercise my copyright in stopping the photograph. And so it was like that all along until the movie. And the movie was the first time that there was going to be a kind of a replica, kind of. And I thought that if that happened without the actual photograph, that then it would be almost like the two of them would be made to disappear, and that the movie would replace them. And that I could not have happened. So I just bought a ticket to London and went and saw the director, and at the very last minute okayed the movie showing the photograph. But it was one of the most difficult things I did. But now in the internet age, in Wikipedia you can legally show it. So it's now topsy-turvy in that people who ask me for their photograph, I say no, I can't release it, and yet it's out in the world. So that has to be addressed.
Yeah, it's one of the things about iconic images is that you can't control them. They kind of get out in the world,
Yeah.
and that must be a frustrating, and still is a frustrating thing to try and control an image. Another question I had from the movie and from the book was just the amount of risk that you both took in that, not just the physical violence, and that you sustained physical attacks, and Gene ultimately died from the injuries that he got from a beating at one of the protests, but you were also eating the fish while you were there and living there for 3 years. Can you talk about how you both approached those risks, and were you always on the same page?
Oh, we were always on the same page about everything. The only reason we split up is I just got exhausted. He's very, I don't know. Anyway, but we were like always on the same page, with how to photograph and about those issues. But it didn't feel like anything that big, because right in front of you there's something much more bigger. I mean, parents having lost their children, or being bedridden or whatever, and so you're in there, and there's so many people involved and working on the issue that it's just sort of natural. I mean, the beating was very difficult because after that, all the time, I mean, he used to just faint. And I would drag him over here and keep photographing because, well, he'll wake up, kind of. I mean, that happened once when we were or we escaped hospitals to go and photograph and got scolded by the doctor. And, it was all continuing, really. And he asked me to get an axe from the bath to just split his head because it was so painful, just kill me, and things like that. It was very painful and very difficult. But it just seemed like just sort of, you just sort of deal with it and live with it, kind of.
A follow-up question to that is just that, I mean, that's for 3 years to deal with that kind of risk and emotional anguish and Gene's injuries, but also the traumas really of all of the subjects. How did you manage all of that at the time and kind of since then?
It was just sort of, you did it, kind of. It wasn't, I don't consider myself, I feel like, it's almost like I'm an example of somebody. It's like you can be flaky and work on these issues, and here's an example. I mean, I really, that's the way I feel about, myself. I'm not, yeah.
Another thing you just said about Gene, that you got exhausted. There was a 31-year age gap between you and Gene, but you said in an interview that he was so young, I felt old.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, he was, well, he'd gone through the war, and I think the war was a really, he's in his early 20s when he's seeing all of the war and everything that happens to people there. And he's holding this dying child, and then he finally realizes it's like a completely different race, and yet, like, I'm holding my child. This is my family that this is happening to. And so he kind of, I think it's very changed. He was more changed. Another thing that changed him was the war. So he had gone through all of that, before I'm even born, right? But he just always just full of humor and jumping up and down and being so excited about things. And I'm kind of like, we're late, kind of like, come on, it's fine being so, wow, it's like, I was sort of the manager. That's the one thing that Andrew, the director, got right, kind of like that manager type thing. So it was trying to keep somebody so young in spirit kind of in control, or not control, but, you gotta, you gotta follow the schedule, kind of thing. And that, yeah, he was very much like that. But he also was drinking scotch from morning to night, and it started with the pain and the war and stuff. And he also got really depressed, and, he had wanted to kill himself when, he said that if I go away, in New York, it's like, by the time you arrive in LA, I'll be dead, kind of, he was just very, in many ways, very irresponsible, but that was what it was. And I think that his photographs were just a whole total of really incredible humor and fun-loving, and the depression, and the injury in the war, and all the the fighting, with the editors and his commitment to journalism. It's just this whole big mixture. I think that photograph of Tomoko was done because it was just all of that total,
Yeah, you mentioned the fighting with the editors. I think also in the book you mentioned that you were kind of frustrated with the Life magazine piece when it originally came out. And can you talk a little bit about that and your idealism for what you wanted it to be?
So I'm like 22 and, a novice photographer, and I'm getting my photographs, put in Life magazine, right? Because I'm working with this famous person, and we were able to make that big splash in the Life magazine. So it's sort of like, but I didn't feel that way at all when I got it. And we had a lot of control over the layout and the text, but they had done the main title. That was Death from a Pipe. And when I saw that, I was weeping, and I was angry, and I was so frustrated. How could they do this Life magazine, thing? I was just very much, and he said, "Hun, this is the most closest I've gotten to what I was aiming for, in all the other essays." And so that's when I realized that he really was a pragmatist too, as well as a idealist, Yeah, he quit in 1954 with photographing. He had photographed Schweitzer, and the way Schweitzer was portrayed. He disagreed with the editors, and in protest, he had resigned. So I knew that the fight had always been going on, but I didn't realize that this was the closest he got to, what he had wanted, this last piece that he did.
And I feel like they got a little of that antagonism in the movie as well as his playfulness and his depression a little bit too. I feel like they hinted at that in the movie as well. One of the things that is in the book and in the movie as well is the fact that one of the chemicals at the factory were used to make photographic processing materials. And I happen to have married into a family of photo collectors who collect antique photography, so I just happen to know that early photographs were also processed with mercury. And early photographers also suffered the effects of mercury poisoning. And so, I'm thinking of even just, the phone that we all have in our pockets, and what are the chemicals that are involved in making this, and what responsibility do we have as consumers too, of knowing where the chemicals come from that make the products that we use.
Yeah, so it's not just sort of criticizing, oh, this is pollution, it's terrible. I think that we divide, the things that we want versus the pollution, and then somehow we want it to go away, or we want to have it reduced as much as possible, whereas we really have to take the whole thing in, the entirety in, and say, is this what we want? So it's yeah, the more you divide it, the more, pollution occurs when you divide the two, It's like a car. If there's cars polluting is running forward, the gas pipe, if the gas pipe is at the wheel, right where the wheel is, so moving forward also makes you sick, then you go, this isn't very convenient, but it's because it's left behind as you drive off, right? So it's trying to bring everything together, which is really difficult with products that we have, of course.
Yeah. So I know I'm kind of running out of time, but I want to make sure that we have enough time to ask questions. So my last question is you have the copyright for these images. What happens with these pictures now? Are you going to be using them for other projects, or what happens with the Minamata photos from here on out?
Yeah, with the copyright, it'd still be around, but of course, eventually, nobody has copyright anymore, at a certain point in time. But right now, we have 9 photographers that photographed Minamata. The earliest is in 1960, and we've all gotten together, and we're working actively, meeting and trying to figure out how to preserve the material, how to archive it properly, but also how to get it out more into the world. So we're working on that actively, actually.
And it's, for those of you who haven't seen it yet, go see the pictures. They're incredible to see in person. I've been looking at them digitally and looking at them in a book, but it's different when you see them on a wall up close. So thank you for allowing us to exhibit them, and everybody should try and go see them if you can. And I'd like to open it up to the floor to the rest of the audience for questions.
Near the end of the slideshow, there was one that showed the 10 techniques that government and companies use to, I forgot what it was, but you know what I'm talking about. I couldn't possibly have written all those down at once. Is there any place where I can find that online so I can have a copy of it for myself?
Thank you. Yeah, I haven't put it online, but let's see, where, I guess maybe I should put it online.
I took a picture of it.
Yeah, but well, it's a good question. What should we do?
We can get it. Yuki, we can always put it back up there, and you can take a picture of it. That's probably what I would suggest.
Well, that might be the most
Or I can text it to
helpful
you.
thing to do right now, maybe. But then not everybody has, a phone or something to photograph right now. But maybe.
Yeah,
but
I can email it to you.
well, but maybe
For
put it up right now. I don't know. well, the light's on here now, but let's see. Let's see. My, you know, we're in Japanese NGOs. Really, I don't know. Sound like I'm calling poor, but whatever you call it in English. But you know, when I hand out my card, it goes like, don't really look at our website because we still got to do something about it. But I could put it up on our website. It's the last. Okay. Well, we can go. You know. Anyway, these are the things. But I really feel. Yeah, it is white on the bottom. I did address number 2, which is confused victims and the public. And then 3 is pit victims against each other. So how it's important to keep the victims and victims connect with each other and support each other. And then the 4th is do not collect data and leave no evidence. So that's, you know, not doing epidemiological studies, et cetera. Same thing happened at 3 Mile Island, actually. And then 5 is buy time and drag it out, because if you drag it out enough, you exhaust the victims, and you just kind of wait for them to die. And then design studies that would underestimate the damage. So this is what we're really worried with this new epidemiological study, because unless the study design is done right, it's basically a technique to make things disappear. And I'm really concerned about that. And then it just exhausts the victims. And number 8 is creating this certification system that narrows down the people that, you know, you make them apply. You make it difficult to be designated. And then the create a state of isolation is really shutting overseas information. I mean, like the government, Japanese government doesn't say that they recognize much, much lower levels of mercury as damaging abroad. And then they come back to Japan and don't recognize much higher levels. So, that's my Japanese. I said, so long as you send it by the end of tonight, I'm okay.
I just want to say, the whole time I was looking at this list, I was thinking of Mark's presentation about Chicago, and I was like, these seem familiar. And with so many things, you know, that this is almost like a universal list.
Yeah.
Protest and delay tactics.
Right. And just to answer that one question a little bit further, I wrote that list because just from experience and seeing these things happen, but it's like the idea is that it's not a comprehensive list. It's not like I've just studied it thoroughly and made the list. It's about, you know, the way of seeing things, and I'm proposing, you know, that you see it as techniques, and you can point out, you know, you can see what's happening. And so it's just a proposed discussion list is what it is. But I also think it's really important to have different lists, like how should academia respond to this? You know, so a list on how-tos for academia, a list on how-tos for companies, you know, who want to be better, you know, how to address that. Also, NGOs, you know, how to address that. What are the techniques for addressing it? Because I think activism is a technique and it's an art. So how to hone that art so that you can address those. So it's like new lists could be made to address these issues, you know.
Would also bridge that divide you were talking about between academia and the activists too. Another question?
Yes. So there was some mention about the inherent risks of staying there, living there, eating there. I do want to kind of circle back to that. How did you trust in an environment where there's basically a conspiracy to poison the environment, and in turn the people, even with the passage of time, I would have been concerned with understanding, have the negative effects dissipated? Can I eat safely? How did you trust?
Yeah, that's a good point. And when we were there, the mercury levels had come down so much. And in hindsight, it's like, it was 1 ppm. It was the UN standard. It was just at that point, just at the safety point, you know, at 1 parts per million. And yet, afterwards, kind of more realizing that the UN standard was for an average male who did not, you know, who consumed an average amount of fish, would not get acute Minamata disease. So, you know, it's not a real protective standard, yeah. And yet, it was like, oh, it's safety level. It's attained the safety level. So I actually helped fishing at Minamata, actually. And my daughter says, like, you know, So you had me a few years later. I mean, how much mercury did you have inside you? And I do not know. But it is true that when you live in that environment, it's like a natural, and it had come down so much. And then after that, since then, they finally dredged over 25 parts per million in the dredge. They had to dredge everything, and they created a landfill, and it's in that landfill. But I know my grandson, who's now 10, but when he was like 8, we're walking along the streets of Kyoto, and he suddenly says to me, "What's going to happen when that dam breaks?" And sort of like, because he goes to Minamata, and he's sort of like, and it's true, if an 8-year-old can imagine it, it's like, I mean, an 8-year-old can imagine it. Maybe the adults have a problem in not being able to imagine it.
Other questions?
So you can see it's sort of like maybe taking it lightly. And then this lawsuit really brought this home to me, because the lawsuit said anybody who ate fish up until January of '74, and it's like, oh boy, we were there for two and a half years before that. If they ate it a lot, then they are in that category of possibly having these effects. Yeah.
So, like, what can an average person do to help with this? Because, if you're going against corporations, which, especially like in the US, have a lot more governmental power, what can a normal, just person do?
Yeah, that's a good question. You mean like in addressing issues here, kind of, or in?
Helping, I mean, you said it's an international issue, so helping anywhere, helping in your own country, helping in other countries.
Yeah, with mercury pollution, it's about it would be about getting rid of fluorescent lights, which is now the big goal at the end of this month. African nations have brought up a plan, and it's whether other nations get on board. And I'm not following really accurately what the U.S. position on it is right now, but we're trying to get Japan on board of it, being really assertive. So it's like, telling your government to be more active. And then, of course, fossil fuel plants, coal, is a big emitter of mercury. And I think that, addressing coal-fired plants is, addressing the climate issue too. Yeah. And the other is, I guess, supporting, your local NGO, kind of, really, because there are people working very actively on these issues. Yeah. The group IPEN, IPEN, is the group that we did that flyer with, that I showed, that was that Shinobu was appeared in that flyer. We distributed that at the premiere of the Minamata movie at Berlin, the Berlinale Film Festival. But that group is very active. Yeah.
And I wanted to add to that there's plenty of environmental issues here locally in Chicago that you can get involved with. There are 2 photo stories that my students worked on in my photojournalism and environmental justice class. And one is about lead in the soil, which they do a lot with at DePaul in terms of research and students involved in that issue, that there's lead in the soil. We think about lead in the water, but it's actually in the soil too, which is a huge problem. And the other story is about air pollution, and it's kind of talking about an Amazon facility and the air pollution in Cicero, and how that's concentrated also on the south and west sides, and the southeast side as well. And so, I mean, just read the news.
pick whatever you want.
Yeah, staying informed is a big part of it. And
yeah, and I think that there's something, it's funny when a person, you could, that this is an important issue, but there's something that triggers you to be interested in this thing, whatever it is, this thing. Well, go for that, go for that. I mean, it is true, it's important to look overall and say what is the biggest issue and how to address it, but something that's a spark of, I want to find out more about this, and I want to do more about this, is, I think, really key. And yeah, locally, it's, yeah.
And be curious. I don't know, I took my students to the southeast side just recently, and we talked with activists and, people who've been working, about the general, all those facilities moved to the southeast side. So just having the opportunity to listen and take my students and kind of learn alongside my students, try and make those opportunities. I try to make those opportunities for myself and my students to keep learning all the time and then incorporate that into my teaching as well.
Yeah, yeah. Every problem you go to, you realize that there's just this handful of people working on this issue that's much bigger. You know, it's like the elephant and the sort of an ant going. I mean, the fly. You're. It's all over, and the number of people that work on it is so much less than the size of the problem.
But also a
all
small
over
number
the
of people
place.
can make a huge difference.
Yeah, yeah, that
really,
too,
who are
but
committed
yeah,
to the
yeah.
issue.
And it's fun, actually. You know, it is. Yeah.
So I noticed that at least like within the photos and like the images displayed, that there was always like this use of like wide lenses and getting close to faces, and I felt like this very personal connection to a lot of the victims that your husband, you were taking photos of. And I was wondering, like, how do you think the personal level of like also maintaining like those personal connections with the victims with like the overarching issue, how do you connect that with the political, I'd say, or just knowing how to maintain those like personal connections with these people and like getting close to them and being able to tell their stories in a way that conveys the larger political issue effectively?
Yeah, you know, photographing is it's about asking for permission, but it's like a nonverbal thing that's going on. You know, sort of like understanding how close and how much you can push it, or you can move forward, and understanding the more than this is resistance. You know, and that's the part that's what you're doing all the time, you know, because it is an invasion, it is an intrusion. So it's like, is this much okay, you know, kind of closeness. But I think, you know, being visible and knowing, you know, in our case, you know, like our house, it was like you could see, oh, they're messy, or they left their futon out and it's going to rain, or, you know, you see, we were more exposed, kind of. And it's almost like, you know, are they going to be all right? You know, are they going to, you know, kind of, we got to kind of help them out. They're like, you know, this guy's older and she's so young. I don't know. We just, you know, how are they going to be, you know, and he doesn't understand Japanese. And, you know, there's I think, yeah, a little bit knowing where we're coming from, you know.
And I think just the amount of time you spent there allows you to get to that closeness. You know, and that's what I tell my students, like, if you really want to get that kind of story plant, you're going to have to spend a lot of time to earn trust, to let people let you into their space like that.
Yeah, that's true too. I also think in a way it was easier that we're both not Japanese, you know. I mean, I grew up in Japan and Japanese culture, but that there is, I don't know, it's like, it's like, oh, they don't quite understand the rules. Not like misusing it, but more was allowed, you know, I think. I think it was easier for Tomoko's mother to say yes to us about that photograph. It would have been harder somehow with both cultures being Japanese.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think so, you know.
Well,
But of course, trusting, you know, of course, trusting.
I think we're about out of time.
Yes, if that's okay, but I also would like to make a couple of announcements. And before that, one of the things which, well, I was very pleased to hear that Aileen urging us to think about what we can do. And then that was one of the questions, what we could do. And one of the things which I remember what Aileen was talking about earlier in to a class of students, that someone in somewhere worked for our environment or for our rights. So that's why we enjoy having the rights to vote, or we enjoy being in the classroom without being worried about asbestos or, you know, like pollution. And that really motivated me to think about I also have to do something to make things better for the younger generation or for the coming generations. And it was, so it was very moving, and I'm very glad that we are thinking what we could do So thank you very much for your talk, and thank you all for coming tonight. And I'm very grateful for our guest speakers, Miss Aileen Mioko Smith, Dr. Mark Parsnak, and Dr. Robin Hicker. And for the exhibition, for the photo exhibition, we've been talking about many faculty members of the art school helps us. In particular, Professor Jeff Carter and there's Professor Steve Harp came to the gallery many times to help us to put together the exhibition. Ellie Wallace, the studio manager of the art school, gave so much help and made the exhibition space impeccable. The last but not least important figure for the entire series of Environment of Disquiet is Dr. Anna Clissold. Where are you? Oh, right there. Okay, she's the Associate Director of the DePaul Humanities Center. She's the driving force of the center. She has been working for the center from the inception, and with her magic hand, a sharp brain, she has realized all our ideas to present to the DePaul community. So thank you, Anna. The DePaul Humanities Center will be putting together exciting events throughout the year. Please stay in touch. We are having a reception, and also one of the fun things is we are also having a reception outside of this hall. Please enjoy yourself, and also the conversations with our guests. Thank you again, and have a good night.